The crisp February air carried the scent of damp earth and pine as John and Mary strolled through the sprawling hills of their Northern California property. It was a routine walk, one they had taken countless times before. Their old Labrador trotted ahead, sniffing eagerly at the underbrush, tail wagging in excitement at some newfound scent. But something was different today. As they reached a familiar bend along the narrow dirt path, the dog suddenly froze, its nose pressed against the ground. It let out a curious whimper, pawing at something half buried in the soil. John, always one to indulge the dog's instincts, knelt beside it and brushed away a thin layer of dirt. A glint of rusted metal peeked through the earth. Mary leaned in, her brow furrowing. "What is that?" John pressed his fingers against the cold, corroded surface and felt the distinct cylindrical shape of an old can. It was wedged deep, as if time itself had been holding it in place. He dug his fingers in and gave a firm tug. The canister shifted, resisting at first, then giving way with a dull crunch as the hardened earth released its grip. It was heavier than it looked, much heavier. He turned it over in his hands, examining the jagged rust patterns, the pitted metal weakened by years of exposure. Then, as he gave it a slight shake, something inside clinked. Metal on metal. Mary's eyes widened. "Coins?" John exhaled, feeling his pulse quicken. "Maybe." With a cautious hand, he pried at the lid, feeling the resistance of time itself before the corroded edges crumbled away. The moment the lid came loose, the afternoon light caught something inside, a flash of gold. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled only with the wind whispering through the trees. Then, almost in unison, they both exhaled a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. "What in the world?" Mary murmured, reaching for one of the coins, her fingers trembling as she lifted it into the sunlight. It was pristine, unbelievably so. John turned the can over and more coins spilled onto the earth, their surfaces gleaming despite decades, perhaps centuries, undisturbed underground. The sheer weight of them made his heart pound. "This isn't normal," he muttered. Mary looked around suddenly, as if the trees themselves were listening. "John, what if there's more?" They locked eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. This was only the beginning. The weight of the coins in John's hands felt unreal, as if he were holding history itself. Mary swallowed hard, her fingers still trembling from the shock of their discovery. The dog, unaware of the magnitude of the moment, pawed at the ground, wagging its tail, urging them to dig further. John looked around, scanning the silent trees, the rolling hills stretching beyond. The rusted can had been buried deep, too deep to have ended up there by chance. Someone had put it there, intentionally. Mary took a step back, pressing a hand to her chest as if trying to steady her breath. "John, what do we do?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched down, brushing the dirt where the can had been. The soil was looser than the surrounding ground, as if it had been disturbed before. His mind raced. Whoever buried this hadn't just tossed a few coins into a hole. They had made sure it was hidden. He looked up at Mary. "We dig." She hesitated for only a second before nodding. John hurried back to their house, grabbing a sturdy shovel and a pair of work gloves. His hands shook slightly as he returned to the spot, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. Mary stood waiting, her arms crossed, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and unease. Taking a deep breath, John plunged the shovel into the ground. The first few inches were easy, soft topsoil, but as he dug deeper, the earth became compacted, resisting the intrusion. Then, clank. John's grip tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears. Mary let out a sharp breath. "John, that's..." He dropped the shovel and crouched down, sweeping away the dirt with his hands. Another rusted canister. His fingers trembled as he dug around its edges, freeing it from the earth's grasp. When he lifted it, the weight sent a thrill up his spine. He forced the lid open. More gold coins. Mary clutched his arm, her breath shallow. "There's more, isn't there?" John didn't answer. He didn't need to. The second canister was buried only inches from the first. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a pattern. They exchanged a look, and without another word, John drove the shovel back into the earth. They dug for what felt like hours, their hands aching, the cold sweat clinging to their backs. Every time they thought they had reached the end, another can appeared, then another, and another. 8 canisters, each filled with gleaming gold coins, some so untouched by time that they looked as though they had just left the mint. Mary knelt beside the last canister, her fingers tracing the edges of a coin. "John, what have we found?" John exhaled, his hands shaking as he wiped the dirt from his forehead. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we just changed our lives forever." The sun had long begun its descent, casting elongated shadows across the hills, but John and Mary remained frozen in place, staring at their extraordinary find. The weight of the moment settled over them, not just the physical weight of the gold, but the gravity of what it meant. 8 rusted canisters, each filled with shimmering gold coins, some over a century old. Mary ran her fingers over the embossed face of a $20 double eagle, feeling the cold metal against her skin. "John, we can't just leave them here." John nodded, his mind already racing with 1,000 questions. Who buried them? How long had they been here? And most importantly, what did they do now? He looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, but now they felt less like comforting sentinels and more like silent onlookers. "We need to move these now," John said firmly. Mary hesitated. "What if someone—" "There's no what if." His voice was low, steady. "We don't know who put them here, or if someone is still looking for them." A chill ran down Mary's spine. The thought hadn't fully registered until now. Someone had hidden this fortune, and perhaps someone had never come back for it. They worked quickly, carefully transferring the coins back into the canisters and wrapping them in cloth. John carried them 2 at a time back to the house, his heart pounding with every step. Mary stayed behind, brushing away any sign of their digging, smoothing the soil as if trying to erase history itself. By the time they secured the last canister inside their home, the sky had deepened into navy, and the first stars flickered overhead. John locked the doors, double-checking every window, an unfamiliar unease settling in his chest. Mary sat at the kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp, casting warm light over the stack of gold coins in front of her. "We need help, John," he exhaled slowly. She was right. This was too big to handle alone, but who could they trust? The temptation to tell someone was overwhelming, but John had seen enough stories, people who found treasure, only to lose it all because they made the wrong move. "Not just any help," John said. "The right help." Mary studied him, then nodded. "We find someone who knows what they're doing. Discreetly." John ran a hand through his hair. "I think I know where to start." Tomorrow they would take the first step toward unraveling the mystery of their discovery. But tonight, as the weight of millions in gold sat hidden within their walls, neither of them slept. John sat at the kitchen table long after Mary had gone to bed, staring at the canisters lined up before him. The soft glow of the lamp cast their rusted surfaces in eerie shadows. He ran his thumb along the ridged edge of a coin, feeling the weight of history pressed between his fingers. A fortune, hidden in the dirt. His mind buzzed with possibilities. Who buried it? When? And why? More importantly, why had it never been recovered? He glanced at the locked front door. Were they the only ones who knew about this? By morning, both he and Mary knew they couldn't keep the discovery to themselves forever. But they had to be smart. The wrong step could bring a storm of problems. Treasure hunters trampling their land, the government making claims, strangers showing up at their door. John picked up the phone and dialed the number of an old acquaintance. David, a private coin dealer he'd met at a small auction years ago. The man knew gold, and more importantly, he knew how to keep his mouth shut. After 2 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? David, it's John. I need you to come by. I've got something unusual." A pause, then a slow, knowing hum. "Unusual how?" I'd rather show you in person. David was silent for a moment. Then, I'll be there in a few hours. John hung up and looked at Mary, who had been listening from across the room. Are we sure about this? She asked. John hesitated. No, but we can't do this alone. David arrived just after noon, pulling up in a dusty sedan that had seen better days. He was a tall, wiry man with silver hair and sharp eyes, the kind that had seen too many deals go bad. As he stepped inside, he glanced around the living room with a quiet awareness, as if already assessing the situation. John wasted no time. He led him to the kitchen and without a word popped the lid off one of the canisters. David's sharp intake of breath was all the confirmation they needed. Carefully, he picked up a gold coin, turning it under the light. Double Eagle, San Francisco Mint. He flipped it over. Looks almost uncirculated. Where did you get these? John and Mary exchanged a glance. We found them, Mary said carefully. David raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, he whistled low and slow. You don't just find gold like this, John. He gestured to the full canisters. This is a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Maybe the biggest private find I've ever seen. John nodded. That's why we need you. We don't want a circus. David's expression turned serious. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Then listen to me very carefully. You cannot tell anyone. Not your neighbors, not your family, no one. The moment word gets out, you'll have reporters, collectors, and the IRS breathing down your neck. Mary swallowed hard. What do we do? David set the coin down and exhaled. First thing, we get these authenticated and appraised, quietly. I know a firm that can handle this, trustworthy people. John folded his arms. And after that, David looked at them both, his face unreadable. After that, we figure out who might have buried them. And more importantly, if anyone is still looking for them. The air in the room grew heavy. Mary shivered. What if someone comes looking? David tapped the edge of the table. Then you'd better hope they aren't still alive. Silence. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, but inside, John and Mary felt something else entirely. For the first time since their discovery, the gold didn't just feel like treasure. It felt like a secret too dangerous to keep. The weight of David's words hung in the air like an unshakable fog. Then you'd better hope they aren't still alive. Mary's hands were cold as she gripped her coffee mug. John clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Finding the gold had been thrilling, almost like a dream. But now it was beginning to feel like something else. A problem. A risk. David ran his fingers over one of the coins again, deep in thought. I've seen rare finds before, but nothing like this. These coins weren't just lost, John. They were hidden. John nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. Someone went through a lot of trouble to make sure no one found them. Mary glanced toward the front door, her paranoia creeping in. But why bury them here? Who would have done this? David exhaled, shaking his head. That's what we need to find out. And I have a place to start. He pulled out his phone and tapped a few keys before looking up. The coins you found were minted between 1847 and 1894, right? John nodded. Mostly $20 double eagles. A few $10 and $5 coins too. David rubbed his chin. That time frame puts us right in the middle of the California gold rush. This area was a hot spot for miners, prospectors, and thieves. A chill ran through Mary. You think it was stolen? David shrugged. It wouldn't be the first time someone hid money they couldn't explain. Back then, banks weren't always trustworthy and people preferred to stash their fortunes in the ground. But he paused. The sheer amount of gold here, this wasn't some miner's rainy day fun. This was serious money. John's stomach tightened. So, who would have had this kind of gold? David leaned forward. We're talking old money, businessmen, outlaws, maybe even corrupt officials. There's one case that comes to mind. Mary stiffened. What case? David glanced at his phone again. In 1901, a man named Walter Dimmick was accused of stealing $30,000 in gold coins from the San Francisco Mint. The coins were never recovered. Silence. John's mind reeled. $30,000. That would be worth millions today. Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. You think we found stolen government money? David exhaled. Not necessarily. The coins you have don't match the exact denomination stolen in that case, which means we can probably rule it out. Relief flickered across John's face, but David wasn't finished. However, he tapped the edge of a canister. This hoard, it's still unusual. There were plenty of infamous outlaws operating in California at that time. People like Jesse James and Black Bart. If this gold was hidden by someone trying to escape the law, there could be more to this story than we realize. Mary swallowed hard. And if someone else knows about it? David met her eyes. Then you need to be ready for that. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in as the reality of their situation deepened. John took a slow breath. So what's next? David leaned back. First, I'll reach out to some contacts to verify the coins anonymously. We'll find out exactly how rare they are and if any of them have historical significance. Mary nodded, gripping the edge of the table. And after that? David's expression darkened. After that, we find out whose gold you just dug up. The weight of David's warning lingered in the air like a storm cloud. If anyone still knows about this, you might not be the only ones looking. John locked the doors. Mary pulled the curtains shut. It was strange. Just days ago, their lives had been normal. Now, they were sitting on a gold hoard worth millions, possibly tied to something much bigger than they had ever imagined. That night, neither of them slept well. Every rustle of the wind, every creak in the house made their hearts pound. Was it paranoia, or was someone truly out there? By morning, David called again. I have good news and bad news. John clenched his jaw. Start with the bad. David sighed. There's no paper trail, no official records, but I found a rumor. In the late 1800s, there were whispers about a missing fortune, a stash of freshly minted gold coins that was supposed to be part of a large private transaction. But before it could be delivered, it vanished. Mary frowned. Vanished? Like it was stolen? Maybe, or hidden. David's voice dropped. It was never claimed. No reports, no follow-ups. Whoever buried it either died, disappeared, or never dared come back for it. John ran a hand through his hair. And the good news? David hesitated. If no one claimed it in over a century, then legally, it's yours. Silence. Mary covered her mouth, stunned. John stared at the canisters, his thoughts spinning. Yeah, David continued, but listen, you still have to be careful. People love a mystery. The moment this gets out, someone, government, collectors, historians, someone will try to make a claim. You need to move smart. You need a lawyer, an appraiser, a private auction. No public announcements. John nodded slowly. We'll do this right. David exhaled, relieved. Good. I'll connect you with the right people. In the meantime, keep it quiet. After the call, John and Mary sat in silence, absorbing the truth. This wasn't just a treasure hunt, it was history, a mystery without an answer, and now it was theirs. What really happened to the Saddle Ridge hoard? After their discovery in 2013, they contacted Kagan's Inc. to authenticate, appraise, and handle the sale of the coins. Most of the coins were sold through Amazon and private auctions, with some individual pieces fetching nearly $1 million each due to their rarity and pristine condition. The couple remained anonymous to avoid treasure hunters and legal complications. They used part of the proceeds to pay off debts and donate to charities. The origin of the hoard remains a mystery. While some speculated that it was stolen from the San Francisco Mint, experts ruled this out due to inconsistencies in the coin types and records. The most likely theory is that an unknown individual buried the coins, possibly distrusting banks in the late 1800s. Even today, no one knows who buried the gold or why it was never recovered. The mystery of the Saddle Ridge hoard remains one of the greatest treasure finds in U.S. history.